All right, I got a link. I'll put it up on our Twitter in a moment. I'll just drop a tweet, mentioned you. It's on at React Denver. We'll kick things off in a couple more minutes. See the thumbs up. I'll have a few announcements to share, and we'll get into a really, really cool intro that I'm excited to see. I haven't gotten to look at Remix very much, but this will be a great way to get an intro.
Yeah, I watched the announcement, and I've watched a little bit. I'm excited to go back to my PHP days.
This is people tell me that it feels like PHP, and I don't know, but
I mean it's more of like, yeah, it's like your entire controller is one file, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, there's HTML back here.
Yeah, it's kind of supercharged, I'd say, with modern tech. That's why it's a remix.
All right.
Cool. Heads up, I just made it so no one can unmute themselves or start the video at this point, just to keep things locked down for the live stream. I'll open that up later on when we stop the live stream so we can hang out as well. If you haven't been here before, we'll do a quick intro to the meetup, get into the talk, do some questions. And usually this drags on for a couple hours. We'll hang out and keep it going as long as possible, kind of in an informal way. It just turns into an informal, just banter, chat, talking jobs, talking hiring, talking tech, all that stuff. So it gets pretty loose later on. Still very professional, but really just everyone can hang out as much as they like. And I'm gonna go over my notes, and I'm gonna give it one more minute and we'll get rolling. All right, let's kick things off. Welcome to React Denver. It's December 21st, 2021, our last meetup of the year. And what a year has it been? We're really happy to still be having these online. It's been a great way to keep the community going, to keep connecting. We've been really happy as well to have people beyond the Denver community join us for these. That's one of the benefits of going to Zoom, going online. So we really appreciate you tuning in, whether you're in Denver, in Colorado, or anywhere around the world. It's so awesome to have you. We're really happy to come together, especially during the holidays, for one more meetup before the new year. I'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Biggest one is Zoom. They've supplied us with a really great unlimited account to host this. So they've been amazing over there. And I also want to thank Jeff Bungart in particular. He's one of the co-organizers of this meetup, and he helped put this one together. So big shout out to Jeff. He's been awesome and just a great community member that we've had since the beginning of this meetup. And he's really stepped up this year to help us keep things going. With that, I'd like to share a couple updates. For next year, we were hoping to meet in person soon, maybe as soon as January. That's changed a little bit with everything developing, but I'm still optimistic and hopeful that sometime next year we will meet in person again. We are also thinking about how to keep this as hybrid oriented as possible. We used to meet in person and live stream the event to YouTube. We're hoping to continue to do that. So this is actually our first time live streaming to YouTube in a while. Hopefully it's working, whether you're watching on Zoom or you're tuning in on YouTube right now live or in the future. We hope that's working well. We are so happy to share all the content that we have from whoever's presenting beyond just tonight as much as possible. As for other things going on, I want to give a shout out to a couple conferences that are happening in person next year. I don't know of any that are remote right now. There probably are some that have been announced. I'm just not off the top of my head. But there are two in particular. React Miami is scheduled for April 18th and 19th, happening in Miami. Maybe I'll be there. I hope that everyone that can make their way there is able to. Just so happens that somebody speaking tonight is going to be presenting there as well. So it's going to be a pretty great event. There's the other speakers that are also announced are all fantastic. So it looks like a really great event in Miami. I think it looks amazing. The other conference I want to give a shout out to is Cascadia JS. They're also announced to be in person. They're happening in August 30th till September 2nd, I think 3 or 4 days. And it's in Sun River, Oregon. So that's going to be out back in the Pacific Northwest, where it's kind of always located, but at Ben River, Oregon. And that's going to be a pretty cool, not Ben River, Sun River, Oregon. So that looks pretty cool. I've got tickets to that. I'm planning to take the family and get up there and spend a week up there in August. With that, I want to again say thank you all for joining. Keep in mind, we have a code of conduct on our website, reactdenver.com. Basically, everyone, please be nice to each other and be as gracious as possible and treat everyone with respect. And we really appreciate having you here. I'm going to turn it over to our amazing speaker. Kent C. Dodds is a fantastic community member who has been, I think, sharing React knowledge and libraries for as long as anyone these days. He's been a fantastic teacher of so many people, whether you've tuned into his classes or taken his courses, or you've just seen his talks or his blog articles or React testing library and all the different things he's created. He's a fantastic person. I'm so excited to have him. Kent, thank you for joining us. You're muted, Kent. Oh, you can't unmute. All right. That's my mistake. All me. And I will do it right now. Kent. There you go. Ask to unmute.
Boom. I am now live. This microphone works. Thank you. That was a really nice intro. I appreciate that, Will. You're a great person also. So thank you, everybody, for attending and for putting this meetup together and everything. So I'm excited to talk about Remix because it's the thing that I've been just basking in since it was released about a year ago. And I enjoyed it so much, rebuilding my website with Remix so much that I decided to go full-time. So I'm a full-time remixer. And I'm in charge of developer experience. So as awesome as what I was doing already was, Remix all I wanted to do was teach people Remix. That was my plan even before I decided to join up with Remix. I was just like, I'm just going to join up with or teach Remix all the time. And I was talking with Ryan and Michael about collaborating and stuff. And they said, you know what, maybe it'd be easier if you just worked here. and so, yeah. And now I work at Remix and I love it and it's awesome. And I want to tell you all about it because I just think it's the best. And I'm an enthusiastic person. I like to share the things that I love with people that I care about. And that includes all of you. So that's what this is all about. If you have not been to the remix.run website, then you're in for a real treat because Ryan put this together with a designer. And my goodness, it's a really cool homepage, cool scrolling experience. And it is so great that I use it for my slides. So I don't have slides. I just use the homepage and we go through it together. And I talk about call out some of the specific things as we go. So, and I'm going to stand up here really quick too. So what is Remix? Remix is a web framework for enabling you to build fantastic user experiences for the web. That is what it is at a fundamental level. It uses React currently. Eventually, we may support other frameworks, but right now React is like more widely used than every other framework combined. So it's clearly a good start for us. And it takes a completely different approach to building websites in a way that remixes the way that we used to build websites back in the 90s with the modern technology that we have now. And so maybe I should come up with some slides for this part, because I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. For those of you, and actually go ahead in the Zoom, you can like raise your hand to do emoji reactions. So go ahead and give me a raise of your hand if you just started in web dev in the last 6 years. And I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll continue. But I want to get a sense for where everybody's at. So because for a lot of us who have been doing this in just the last 6 years, we're not, we learned how to do things in a way that requires a little bit of extra work, but we're doing it for a good reason. So yeah, it looks like from what I'm seeing, we have about a third, maybe a quarter of people who are in the Zoom who have been just getting started in the last 6 years. That's actually less than I expected, but yeah, there are a lot of us who are just getting started. You can go ahead and put your hands down if, or you can leave them up. I don't actually really care that much. What makes Remix, let's do a little bit of a history lesson for everybody. So around like 15 years ago or so, the way that we built websites was we had the browser would say, hey, I want to get this content, like HTML content for this URL. We go through DNS to find the IP address, and we get routed to a server. Okay, so browser gets to a server. Server says, hey, cool, I know who you are, and I know like I know who's requesting this and information about that. Let me go look up in my database for the data for you, and do all the things that I need to generate some HTML and send a response that has the content type for HTML, and sends that HTML over the wire back to the browser. And then the browser loads all that HTML. And that's how websites worked. The problem with this is that you would end up with just a white screen for a while you were waiting for things to load. Like anytime you go, I should like make a website that you can configure to be slow, so I can like demonstrate this a little better. But like if you go to really any website, the first thing that you're going to see, and if you do it with no cache at all. So let's do this right here. Empty cache, hard reload. You're going to see the fave icon has a little spinner here. If you're not actually already on the site, then what you're going to see is and I had the cache again. Hold on a second. We'll get this. The browser does a couple things to make the experience a little bit better. Oh shoot, did I have the cache? No, it's disabled. I don't know what's going on. Normally you'd see a white screen. Like the first time you ever go to this page, I think it actually could be that I have the PWA installed or something. So it's a little bit faster. So you can do things that make things a little faster. But back in those days, we didn't have all those fancy fandingles, and we just had this white screen that you're looking at. You have a little spinner in the fave icon. It wasn't a great experience. And so what we decided to do was we say, well, okay, let's speed up our servers a little bit or whatever, but there's only so much you can do when your connection is like 100 kilobits or less, right? So what we decided was, well, there's a lot of our stuff that doesn't require the origin server. So let's take all of the like JavaScript files, CSS, and all that stuff. We'll put it on the CDN, and then we'll invent a CDN first of all, which is just a bunch of servers all over the world, and then we'll put these static files there so that I don't have to go from Sydney, Australia, all the way to Chicago where the servers are, but we can just put the servers close to where the people are and serve that content really fast. And we'll make those CDN servers really good at just serving these static files. And so then like we sped up loading images and JavaScript and CSS, but still we were going all the way to this origin server for the original HTML. And so to avoid this white screen while we're waiting for that initial load, we said, how about we put that HTML on the CDN as well? And that works out, except that for most apps that end up like actually making money and are like make business sense, you need to have some sort of user specific content. And so you don't know where that content's going to come from until you actually have made this request to an actual server that has that data. And so what we would do is we'd say, okay, well, let's put that HTML on the CDN, but then we'll put a loading spinner in place while we're waiting to get the actual content for the user. And so what that bought us though, like that was useful because instead of just having a white screen with the favicon loading, we can have a loading spinner to say like, hey, I see you, like I know it's like we're responding. So just give me a second to figure out who you are and get the data that you need. Unfortunately, well, like this came with the trade-off that your loading experience was not great. So an example of this, if we go to github.com, for example, you're going to see, and I have slow 3G enabled and we aren't caching. So this is the first time that I'm coming to this site. I land on the page and they are doing some server rendering, but they're doing a lot of this stuff on the client as well, where you have a bunch of loading spinners in place. We have the same thing with Twitter as well. So if I disable the cache, go to twitter.com, then we get a bunch of loading spinners as part of our loading experience. And this is not great, but like part of the idea was we wanted to give the user something useful faster than we could if they went all the way to our origin server. So like we're making this trade-off. And here's the thing that makes where Remix kind of comes in. We, instead of giving our users this sort of a janky loading experience, we thought, what if we could take a couple steps back in time and say, let's solve this problem in a different way. Rather than putting all of this on the, well, and sorry, I kind of skipped another piece of history where Gatsby came in and other similar frameworks to do SSG and pre-generate those HTML pages. So it's not just a white screen with a spinner. It's like it can have some stuff in place, but even then, anything that's user specific on that page is going to have a spinner in place. And that's kind of what we experience with both Twitter and GitHub. I believe they are server rendering, but that's kind of the experience they give us, is the same sort of thing you would get with static site generation. So let me actually, we're going to skip down here a little bit. This is the experience that we're talking about here, is by putting our HTML on a CDN, we're able to send the user something really fast, but it's not all that useful. And it leads to this experience. So watch this carefully. As I'm scrolling through this, this is the loading experience for a user. And I want you to imagine what websites you've experienced give you this kind of experience, because you have. It's probably like your banking site or like your energy utility company or whatever. And this is what it looks like. So loading spinner, now I know who you are. And so I'm gonna now go get the code that I need for the part of the app I'm gonna show you and the data that I need for who you are. And then we continue, and we've got, I'm now that I've got the code for like the shell of the app, I have my nav on the left, but now I've bumped this spinner over here because now I need to load what's in the sales tab. And then once I get the sales tab, now I got to get the sales nav. And then once I get that, I got to get the invoices. And so we have this janky experience where it's spinner, 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 spinner. And totally, you've all experienced this before. And it's not a great experience, but we end up in this situation for a couple of reasons. For one, we've decided that it's really it's really nice to be able to co-locate your data requirements with your with the code that requires that data. For another, we've built such big applications that it doesn't make sense for us to send all of the code all at once. And so we can't just send all of the code for the user for the entire app for like the login screen. That would make it take too long to load. And so we chunk this up and using code splitting, which Webpack kind of invented, or not invented, but like brought to the masses. And so we can split this up into smaller chunks, so I don't have to send so much to the user. But what that means is I don't know until my code has started running who the user is and what pieces of the app that I need. And because I've co-located my data, I also need to have that code before I know what data I need to get. or how to go get my data. And so that's what leads to this loading experience where things are jumping around all over the place, because I know who you are, so I'll show you the spinner while I go get that root code. Now that root code is run, but it has a component that it has rendered that needs its own data and its own components, and it just keeps on going from there. It's not a great loading experience at all. But again, we did this because our servers were so slow. We didn't want to just have a white screen. At this point, I would kind of argue that the white screen would be better than like the things jumping around, but this is where we are today. So Remix has said, hey, what if we take a few steps back and say, okay, we've got this white screen problem. What if we could make it so that our servers are fast enough so they can respond super fast, and then also take advantage of the power of CDNs to actually render user-specific data on the edge, so that we can render user-specific data just as fast as you can send static files that are not user-specific, right? So if we can do that, then you end up in a situation like we have here on the right, where you are loading your document, and potentially it takes longer to load, though we have had a number of demos that we're seeing where Remix can actually serve a user-specific server rendered page just as fast as you can get the index HTML from the CDN. So that's neat. But even assuming that is not what you get, and you have to wait another 100 milliseconds or something, as soon as you hit this right here, there's no content layout shift. There's no jank. You get exactly the app. And at that point, you can start loading the JavaScript and CSS and whatever else. But we can actually, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but right now we're working on taking even these static assets and pushing them over here to the left. So by the time the document is loaded, we've actually hydrated as well. But we haven't shipped anything like that, so I'm not going to go too deep into that, but just look forward to that because it's going to be epic. So in any case, what's really cool about this is that Remix not only does it do the server rendering stuff. So like, hopefully I've established server rendering is awesome. And because of the advancements in compute on the edge, we can actually have things just as fast as putting things on a CDN without the jank. So that's what we've established so far. So the other cool thing about this is because Remix has embraced the web platform so much, the entire application is functional at this point in time. So this app totally works before we've even finished loading the JavaScript. So link tags or links from Remix, they just render an anchor tag, and that has like an href, which is within the app, right? So if I click on subscriptions, the web has always known how to do anchor tags. And so you click on it and it will work. It will trigger a full page refresh. That's how the web does that. But it will work. You'll be able to navigate over there, and it will still be just as fast, and it will still work even before the JavaScript is loaded. And if we had a delete trash icon right here where I wanted to delete an invoice, then I could click that, and with Remix, that will also work without JavaScript. So you can actually start using the app before the JavaScript is finished loading. We used to say like Remix works without JavaScript, and people didn't quite get that. So now we say Remix works before JavaScript. So it's not that we care about like not using JavaScript. We love JavaScript. It enables accessible things. Like without JavaScript, you can't make some UI components that are accessible. And so we like JavaScript, but what's important here is that Remix works before JavaScript. And that has a lot of cool implications. So for the last 6 years or so, a lot of frameworks have realized that, oh my gosh, we're shipping so much JavaScript to the browser and it's making things take forever to load. And so we'll like support code splitting, and we'll do all of this, tree shaking and all of this stuff to try and slim down how big of a library we are, or we'll completely rewrite it so it can be really small. Now we have Preact, and it's awesome. We're spending all of this time trying to make the amount of JavaScript we send smaller, which I think is still a really valuable thing. But when you look at something like this, that actually becomes less important because I can use my app while the JavaScript is loading. I can do mutations, and I can do navigations and all of that stuff while the JavaScript is loading in the background. And so, which is not something that you can do if you just send everything to the CDN and have everything working working in that way, the way that we've been doing it for the last 6 years or so. So this is awesome. This is one of the coolest pieces of Remix from the user's perspective. And that's the thing that we're focused on so much with Remix is the user experience. And that's why Remix was created, is because we couldn't see, or I guess we could see a way to make the user experience better than what people were building with the existing technologies. And we couldn't see a way for those existing technologies to pivot to support this sort of user experience, in large part because the infrastructure that enables this is our distributed web infrastructure with things like Cloudflare workers, Dino deploy, Fly.io, regional deploys, these different really awesome technologies that enable you to push your compute to the edge, and not just your compute, but also your data, because it doesn't matter if you can have the server really close to the user. If that server has to go across the world to get its data, then you're still not in a great situation. So these platforms that allow you to push your compute and your data to the edge, that's what's really important here. A big piece of this that enables this really awesome user experience as well is that Remix supports nested routing. And not just like your file system is nested and so it looks like it's nested, whereas like the other frameworks support file system nested routing. But if you look at the leaf routes, they have to care about the entire page. For when that route is active, they have to render like the nav and the everything outside of the piece that it's specific, like that we care about. So that's why you have these layout routes in Next and in Gatsby, because it's not real nested routing. It's file system routing. That's different. So Remix supports the same file system routing, but the way that the routes work is by nesting routes within each other. This has a lot of really cool implications, but let me just explain what I mean here. So every Remix app has the root route, and this is responsible for the entire page, or for like the whole wrapper. And what it does is, as a parent route, it will render an outlet component. This is a React Router version 6 thing. Remix is built on top of React Router. And so with example.com, our root route is responsible for rendering the whole page. And what it does is it will render our left nav over here, and then it renders an outlet next to that. And using like Flexbox or whatever, it lays it out in that way. And so then the sales portion of our URL is another route module that is just responsible for the sales portion. So it doesn't know anything about its parent. It doesn't care. It doesn't need to worry about rendering a left nav or anything like that. That's what the parent did. So it's rendering within the outlet that the parent rendered. And all it cares about is rendering the sales and the nav up here at the top. And then it renders another outlet, because this is also a parent, which has the invoices. And so within the outlet that the sales route module rendered, we're going to render our invoices. And again, the invoices route, all it cares about is rendering this graph right here. And then it renders this list of invoices and then an outlet for the invoice. And then finally, our invoice ID part of our route module here will just render that portion of the app that it cares about. And so this has a lot of really cool implications. And one of them is data loading. So each one of these route modules is responsible for getting its own data. And so the root is probably going to get the user, like pretty much in every application that has authentication, you're probably going to want to get the user at the root. Like you want to know whether the user's logged in and who they are. And then over here, we have like our sales. Maybe we have different things that are enabled or disabled based on A/B testing or who knows what it is. So we're going to have some data specific to the sales. And then we have the invoices section that we're going to need to go get the list of invoices. And then we have the invoice details that we're going to go get the invoice details. And so what's interesting is often our data requirements map directly to the URL. And so this proves to be a pretty great way to think about not only code splitting, but also data loading. And so by associating these two things together, you have a really nice setup from requesting the right data. Because as the user is interacting with my app, if I change which invoice I'm looking at, Remix knows that the only route that changed, all the other routes are the same, except for the invoices route. So it doesn't need to bother loading the data for the other routes because that data is going to be the same. We're just changing which invoice we're looking at. So we only worry about fetching this particular invoice. So the data that this particular route requires, right? And so we don't actually, when you're using Remix, you don't think about global app state management. You don't worry about it because Remix just says, here, define your route modules. Those will define what data requirements they have. And whenever we need data for that thing, we'll just go ahead and call that thing, that loader for you and get the data requirements that you need. And we won't unnecessarily call those when you are changing routes where it doesn't really make a difference. So that's one really cool thing about that. And the other cool thing about this, this implication or the other cool implication about the way that these nested routes are is if we look at the data or the way that you write this, this is a route module right here. So this is what it looks like. You have your loader, you have your default export right here, and then you have this action, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So here's your default export. This is the component that's going to be rendered wherever you are, like in whatever outlet you're at. And this is how you get your loader data, is this use loader data. And here's how you define how what you're going to do to go get your data. And what's really neat about this is the loader and the action, both of these run on the server. And so that means that you can talk directly to a database, or you could call your backend APIs if you've got backend engineers who are doing it. You could call a third-party API and not worry about CORS headers or sharing secret keys or anything, because this is all running on your server. And what's neat about that too is that you don't have to, if you have like some GraphQL API that you're interacting with and you're using the GraphQL library, that library is actually really, really big. But because you're doing this on the server, who cares? It's no big deal. You don't have to send that code to the client. So that's also fantastic. And so Remix, what's really awesome about the way that Remix structures this is the app will work before the JavaScript finishes loading, and the JavaScript will load faster because you're sending less of it because you're using Remix. That leads to a really awesome user experience that I really like. Another cool thing about this is if this get projects API that I'm calling sends me too much data or more data than I need, then it's really simple for me to just go in here and map over that and just remove the pieces that I don't need for my UI. And so now the data overfetching problem that led us all to use GraphQL is eliminated. We don't worry about that anymore because it's very simple. You're just like, oh, here's the component that's using that thing, and here's the thing, and I don't need all that stuff, so I'll just get rid of it. And so you don't, like, it's not a question of how do I avoid data overfetching. It's like, well, don't return so much data from that function is the answer to that question. So that is really, really awesome. Okay, let's continue now. Yeah, goodbye, Spinageddon. Hallelujah. So another cool thing about nested routing is Remix knows everything about your data requirements, your code requirements, and also your CSS requirements because of this links export that we won't get into. But we also know what CSS you require and various other things. Like you could even have fonts or like whatever else. You can preload anything that you want to. And when you're using Remix the default way, and you know that there's a particular link that users are going to click a lot and you want to like prefetch that, then it's really easy to do this. And you end up with this sort of experience where the user is using your app and they mouse over to something that they want to click on. And as soon as the user is giving some sort of intention that they want to click on something, whether that be moving the mouse toward it, right now it's just like a hover thing or a focus thing. Eventually, we'll probably add some additional smarts to make it like, oh, the user's mouse is moving in that direction or something like that. But as soon as they indicate that, hey, I'm going to click on this thing, we can start prefetching all of that, the JavaScript, the CSS, and the data, and whatever else you want to have prefetched. It will all get prefetched. So by the time the user actually clicks on it, it's like that data was already in the client. And what's really great about this is that we're just using prefetch link tags. So what that means is that like for the last 6 years, we've been implementing all of this like, okay, let's go prefetch that data. And that's great. And we prefetch it and we put it into our global context or some sort of cache in memory. Here's the problem with that. When you do that, if the user decides like, oh, never mind, I don't want to click on that, and they close the tab, and then they're like, actually, no, I did want to click on it, and they open it up again, that prefetch cache is gone. So because it was in memory, and so it's eliminated. But because we're using the platform and we're using prefetch link tags, that prefetch cache is actually in the browser, and the browser will hang on to it as long as it thinks it needs to. The other cool, and so like it will be there, and the user can click on it like really fast, and it will still be in the cache. So it survives the session. It lasts as long as the browser sees fit. Now you can of course control that if you don't want it to be cached, long term or whatever. If the user closes the browser, then yeah, that is totally, that's a platform API that has nothing to do with Remix, and you can configure all that stuff with the way your cache headers are set and stuff. But the other really cool thing about this is those abstractions, those in-memory cache abstractions that we've written, after a while, like they release and they're like, sweet, this is awesome. I love using this API. It's amazing. And then somebody files an issue on that thing saying, hey, I've got an out of memory problem with my mobile users. And they're like, oh yeah, sorry, we never get rid of stuff out of the cache, because caching is kind of a hard problem. And so then they have to add a bunch of code to the library to deal with cache invalidation and garbage collection, which is quite a bit of complexity. But because we're using the platform, the browser already did that. And so we don't ever have to worry about all of that extra code. We're just using what the platform has given us. And we end up with a lightning fast experience, which I just think is awesome. Okay, I know that like I'm getting low on my time, so I'm starting to wrap up. We're pretty close to the end of this. So most of the time when a new framework is released, they talk about getting data onto the page, because that's like, what app doesn't do that? One thing that we don't often do, though, when we release a new framework, is talk about how do you allow users to change the data, and how do you make it so that when that data changes, that the data that the user's looking at is up to date. And so often like there'll be just like, use this library, and now you don't have to worry about it. Remix feels like data mutations are kind of a pretty important aspect of building applications. And so mutations are, they're a built-in part of the platform, really. And so they're a built-in part of Remix as well. So here's how you do a mutation in Remix. It's basically the exact same way you would do a mutation with the web platform without a JavaScript framework. You have a form and you have some inputs and a submit button. The user changes those values and they submit. And the browser, yeah, let me step back really quick. So for those of you who raised your hand that you've been just doing this in the last 6 years, the way that you were taught to do forms in React or just in the web most likely involved adding an onSubmit handler to the form. And then in your onSubmit handler, you accept an event. And the first line of your submit handler said event.prevent default. And then the next 20 lines of code were basically doing what event prevent default prevented. So, and the reason that we have been doing this is because I actually don't really know why we've been doing it this way, because the browser already knows how to do this. So like the next 20 lines of your code is like, okay, let's take the values of the form. And most likely you had a bunch of use states up there that are control, like keeping track of those values. And then you call a fetch API, or maybe if you're really an original gangster, you're using Axios or something. And so we're serializing the values of the form and sending them in a network request. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the forms already do this. As soon as you submit, it will serialize the values in the form and send that off to the server. And so most often the reason that we did this, honestly, was because of REST. REST does not necessarily, like it sort of does, and you could definitely build forms that understand REST, but often we didn't. We just didn't learn to do it that way or something. And so we wanted to make sure that our network request that was made conforms to whatever API that is exposed to us. And so, so that meant sending JSON, honestly. A form will not send JSON. It sends URL form encoded stuff. And by default, it does a GET request. And so the default behavior for a form is when you submit it, it will take all the values within the form and turn it into a query string. And it will stick that in the URL and do a full page refresh, a GET request with that in the URL. So then the server can say, oh, I see that you have a query string. Let me do whatever I need to for that and send you the HTML. That's like the basic 15 years ago. That's how we did this. And so like normally you don't want to put all of the values of the form in the URL for various reasons. And so like user experience as well as security and that sort of thing. Like I wouldn't want to type in my password and have somebody watching over my shoulder and see what the password is in the URL. So like, yeah, various reasons. And so you can have it be put inside of a post body. And so you can set the method of your form to be a post. And the form will do the same thing. It'll serialize it, but it'll put it inside of the request body so people can't just look at it. And so the Remix server understands this type of request. And this is why that delete button will work before our JavaScript is loaded, because you can use this uppercase form component from Remix, but that just renders a lowercase form. And then the Remix server understands both the original way that the platform has always done form mutations, as well as the event prevent default. Let's do a fetch request so we don't have to do a full page refresh. And so this is what we call progressive enhancement. If you happen to have JavaScript, then we will make your experience nicer. But if you don't, it still works. And that's what progressive enhancement is. And so you build out your mutation in the same way that you would do it even if you had no framework at all. And then what's really cool is that your server-side code that handles that mutation call, that form submission, lives right in the same file as where you are rendering that form, what route you're on. And so this is running on the server. You can do all your validation logic in here and not worry about people just like going around your client or whatever, because this is the server. So this is where you do the validation. And you can call your database. You can do anything that you want to in here. No CORS issues or any of that garbage that we've been dealing with forever. And you can use any libraries you want and not worry about the bundle size being increased or anything. And it's just right here. And also, this is using web platform APIs. So that's neat. The better you get at Remix, the better you get at the web platform. Form data, if you want to look up docs for what does that thing do, you go to MDN to learn about like what form data does, because that's what we're using is these web platform APIs, which is pretty sick. And then adding on top of that, Remix will handle race conditions for you automatically. So as soon as a mutation has happened, all bets are off on the data that's currently in the client, right? And so Remix will say mutation happened, go get all the data that's, update all the data that's on the page. And so when that happens, if the user decides, hey, actually, I also have another mutation, then that request that we made is now going to come back with stale data. So Remix is like, never mind, cancel that. We've got a new thing and we're going to go get some more additional data or go get the data over again because now we have the second one. So you also never worry about race conditions at all. Remix manages and handles all of that for you automatically. So you don't think about updating your cache or things getting stale or whatever. It's managed for you, and you can just build your app, I guess. What do we do when we're not worrying about these stupid things? I guess we build our app. So the other cool thing about this is you have total control over this loading experience as well, because these submissions will take time. You are on a network. And so you have this use transition hook from Remix that will tell you about what's going on right now. And so you can show some sort of pending UI. But even better, you can also, because the user is the one who's submitting the data, and you're going to like send them to a page for the data they just submitted, well, maybe you could set already render the next thing they're going to look at before the data has even been submitted. This is what's called optimistic UI. And so you have in this case, you have the invoice title and you have the invoice like company who is being invoiced and the amount and everything, because they just created all that. So you can render the next page and give the user an experience that's like, actually, this feels like this happened instantly. And this is a pretty common thing. There are a lot of libraries that support optimistic UI, but what's really cool about this is it's not even really an API. As far as like an optimistic UI API. So you don't have to think about, well, what happens if there's an error on the server? Because you're basically, what you're looking at here is you're saying, if there's a submission, then let's optimistically render the next page, like what that next component is. And if that request fails, then we come back, we don't do the navigation to the next page because that hasn't happened yet. We haven't actually navigated to the next page. And this will re-render and there is no longer a submission. Therefore, you render the form again and you'll have your error messages and everything else in here. So you don't even think about what happens if the thing fails, if there's some sort of error or whatever, it'll automatically just send them right back and they'll see the errors in line. So I have worked with a lot of libraries and built libraries that implemented optimistic UI, and I've never seen anything as simple as this. And what excites me about that is I feel like more people will do it. So my user experience for me using the web will be better. And that's my whole motivation for getting people excited about Remix is I want you all to build Remix apps so that when I'm using the web, there are fewer bugs and a better user experience for me. So it's selfish. That's what it is. Okay, so here's my last thing. Let's talk about errors because we often, errors are the things that designers never design. And it's not their fault because like none of us are thinking about this. And so Remix keeps the happy path happy. So I love this about Remix that I can, within my route module, I can define a route error boundary. So it's kind of similar to what you would think of as a React error boundary where it applies to this particular part of the tree, except it works for the server render, which React error boundaries do not. So if you have an error on the server, when you're running through your code and you access a property that doesn't exist, you're getting a 500 for that. Whoops. And so Remix simulates the same sort of thing for you and it works on the server render. But what's really cool about this is because of nested routing, I just love this animation, so I'm going to do it a couple of times. Because of nested routing, it's all contextual to the route module that blew up. And so this is really awesome because the rest of the app still works. So let's say that you've got an invoice here that has some bad data, something weird happened, and so it's breaking because it's not jiving with the code that's deployed. And so whenever I click on this one, it's busted. And so I, as a user, am like, hey, invoice XYZ or 10-2000 is busted. Could you go figure out what's wrong with that? And then while I'm waiting for the developers to go fix that, I can click around at the rest of the invoices. I can go to subscriptions and customers. Everything else still works. I don't have to worry about the fact that just one particular piece of data is busted because it's all rendered contextually. And if I forget, as the developer, to implement this error boundary, our error boundaries also bubble. And so like, that's not great that you forgot to do that. Maybe add that in, but at least I can still use the rest of the app. So the error boundaries will all bubble up to the top, which is pretty sweet. And that is it. That's everything that there's so many more things about Remix to share, but that's everything that and then that's like over my time, I think, to share with you. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions and stuff, but just to wrap up, I want to say that I joined Remix because all I wanted to do was teach people Remix. I've been teaching React and testing and stuff for the last, I don't know, 6 years or something. And before that, it was AngularJS. And I love teaching people how to build really awesome things for the web. When I started using Remix, I realized, oh shoot, like I'm still like glad that I'm teaching people testing and React through testing JavaScript and Epic React, but I don't want to teach anything other than Remix now because like, what am I going to do? Teach the second best way to build websites? I don't think so. Remix is the best way to build websites. And that's why I'm teaching everybody how and getting so excited about building apps with Remix, because I feel like the user experience is second to none and the developer experience is phenomenal. And so I'm excited for people to play around with it. And I hope that you do because it's just awesome. And that is all I have to share with you. And I'm happy to stick around and answer your questions, but thank you for listening to me rant about this.
Wow, that was really cool. Thank you, Kent.
Thank you, Will.
I can see why you're excited about this. There's a lot of things that are just baked into the way things are like provided by the framework. So you don't have to think about optimistic loading or prefetching things. I'll just jump into a question I've got. What is there anything that you're impressed about Remix, or maybe is not published yet, that is not on this website, that is like, this is really cool, it's going to be adding to the experience in some way?
Yeah. So like things that are coming up that we
Yeah.
haven't released yet. You want the insider scoop?
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically.
So I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. And it's this piece right here. First of all, we've pretty fairly started by showing that, yes, you can get something to the user faster than just the white screen that you get when you are server rendering, because the server is doing a lot of extra work. So we do kind of say, hey, like there is that. But this isn't altogether true, because you can actually stream, and you can do that today with Remix. But we're adding some APIs to make it even better. So we could stream, we could actually start loading some of the document already by now. And yeah, there are two things about this that I want to mention. First of all, we have, with Cloudflare Workers, we have a fully server rendered app that is, the request comes from the browser, goes to Cloudflare Workers and comes back, and it's all hydrated in 19 milliseconds. So like, what? Like, that's nuts. So Cloudflare Workers is something else. And they're not the only ones. Like Fastly has something really cool. Amazon AWS has something really cool that is a similar sort of thing. Compute on the edge is here, folks, and it is fast. And that includes hitting their KV store to go get some user data and stuff like that. That's not just like a play thing. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to get 19 milliseconds response times. Like there are situations where it probably would be like 100, but like 100, what? Like that is fast. So there's that. But the other thing is, when you're streaming, there is a standard that says that you can add special headers to the response that tells the browser to prefetch resources. And when you can do that, then all of this blue stuff that's happening over here can go squished all over to the left, and they can start preloading and loading in tandem with the document. So by the time the document's done, it can be hydrated instantly, basically, like depending on how big your document is and how big your JavaScript is and all that. But yeah, scooching all of that stuff over to the left is kind of our goal. And so, yeah, it's possible that you'll see a Remix app running and hydrating and working faster than something that we thought putting everything on a CDN was the fastest way to get, like time to first byte or whatever metric, and with a way better user experience. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah. we try at Remix, like one of our core values is we don't want to talk a lot about something that we haven't shipped yet. And so like, but you asked, so there you go.
That's a really good core value. I like that. Speaking of your core values, or like what it's like at Remix, could you tell us something about the Remix team or someone in the team that we might not otherwise know, or something cool you like?
Yeah. So there are a couple of well, I mean, I've been friends with Michael and Ryan for a long time. Most everybody knows Michael and Ryan. They're awesome to work with, just as I suspected. I've been wanting to work with them for years. And so, yeah, I'm actually relieved that they're as awesome to work with as I expected. But then there are other engineers. We have Chance, Logan, and Jacob right now, and we are hiring. So I should probably plug that if you want to come work with some really awesome people.
Please do.
Yeah, so there you go. It's remixas/jobs. And we're looking for a senior software engineer to work on the core framework itself, and somebody to work on infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to be huge for us. So we really, if that's your jam, then please come. We need you. So yeah, working with these folks is just awesome. They're really smart, really thoughtful, and like another core value of ours is we don't want to just break people all the time. Like we are not, that was a nice benefit of starting as like a paid thing with the developer preview and stuff is like these people who signed up, myself included, at the time I was not working at Remix. We kind of signed up for breaking changes at the beginning. And so there wasn't like, they were able to make like 20 breaking changes over the course of that time. And they were really like thoughtful and everything about it. But like they were saying, hey, listen, this is beta software. But now that we're at 1.0, we really don't want to break things. And that's another important core value that we will probably have a 2.0 like within the next year or so, I'm guessing. But yeah, that's another thing that we really want to avoid the churn. One of the challenges though is because Remix is kind of like the jQuery for platforms, where we normalize all of the weird things about these different platforms you can deploy to. So you can do serverless on Vercel or Netlify, and you can do Cloudflare workers. Eventually we'll support service workers as well, and you can do Deno deploy and regular node and Express and all this stuff. So we have all these adapters for these different places you can deploy. And if the platform we're deploying to breaks something, well then, yeah, our adapter is going to need to adjust for that. And maybe we can hide that breaking change within the adapter, but we may have to break some of those things. But the core of the framework, as far as we can control, that's something that we're really going to try hard to avoid breaking changes. So, yeah, and I don't know if there was anything else specific that you wanted to know about the team, but
that was really good.
I was honestly, like, I was a little bit nervous because my stuff with Epic React and stuff, like I had plans and it was going to be awesome. And I was really looking forward to some things. And so when I decided, hey, I'm going to switch over and jump on the Remix bandwagon, I was taking a pretty significant risk. And so I was a little bit like, what if I don't like working with them? What if they're just like friends who are cool when I don't have to be with them all the time? But that ended up not being the case. We're really good friends, and we work together really well. So anyway, it's good.
That's great. Somebody had expressed, what took you so long to create this framework? And maybe put another way, what in Remix is surprisingly difficult to do? Or like there's a lot of complexity here and we are really saving you.
Yeah. I'm probably the worst person to answer this question because I joined Remix as an employee or co-founder in November, and they started working on this framework about April of 2020 after COVID decimated their React training business. And so I think the reason it took so long, I think is because this is not an easy problem. The Remix that Ryan showed me when he started demoing it to me in April of 2020 is nothing like the Remix that was eventually shipped. So a lot of experimentation and trying things out was involved there. Some really complex stuff like this down here is right here. This is not easy to do. Dealing with users like click, and this request actually got hung up in the routing process or something, and so it's coming second or whatever. So these race conditions, that I remember Ryan spent about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe over a month, working on the tests and the implementation for this. And I remember he would we would chat pretty regularly. This was still before I joined Remix, about like, okay, how do we think about this? Like, what's the right thing to do? Given the outrageous number of scenarios that you can have. So that might be one of the more complex things that Remix does for you that you don't have to think about. Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest ones. And then also like there's the compiler, which is built on top of ESBuild. But there are some pretty interesting things to enable you to write both server-side and client-side code in the same file. I know that Next.js also does this. They use a Babel plugin that is really complex to make that work, as far as I understand it. We don't actually do it that way. Instead, we make these imaginary modules that are like, here's the imaginary browser module that just imports the specific things that will work in the browser, and here's the imaginary server module that just imports the things that work in just the server, and that's what ESBuild is going to import. It's pretty cool actually, but it ends up making it a lot more straightforward. But it took a while to come to that that final destination on that. So anyway, one thing that you need to know about me is I can be long-winded, and I just like will keep talking.
No, just keep going. There's no problem there. I'll stop you if it goes. It's too crazy, but you've been awesome. Somebody else, Gavin asks, as someone who is in the process of learning front-end development, would Remix make it faster and easier to create a website? Or is it something that should mainly be applied to already existing websites?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, so first I'll preface this by saying I have yet to be confronted with a problem for or a thing that you want to host on the web that would not be made better by using Remix. So Remix is well suited for anything that I can imagine on the web. It may not help a lot with some things, like if you just literally have a single page and all that's on there is a game. It may not necessarily help. You won't be taking advantage of all the cool things that Remix can do for you, but you'll still probably have a better loading experience for the users who are landing on the page. So it's still going to be better than what you could probably do on your own. I mean, like you're amazing engineers and you can do amazing things on your own. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just like, why spend the time doing that when you got Remix? So yeah, as far as like whether this would be like useful or something that you would use on like a new, very simple site or something, I think it's still useful. Even if you're like, well, listen, I'm not doing a whole lot of stuff with JavaScript, like it feels like overkill for that sort of thing. If you're literally just got an index HTML page and there's no dynamism or anything at all, then like, I guess code it in HTML. If that's what you can do, why not? Then you just like stick that on a CDN, like drag and drop the file, and that's your deploy strategy. Like if that's the level of application development that you're working on, then that's probably what I would do too. But Remix, what's really cool, if this is something that you want to maintain in the long term and you've got like, you want to think about a component model and stuff, Remix scales down extremely well. And what I mean by that is it can handle really complex things and it can handle really simple things as well. So scales up and down really well because like this is all it takes for getting something onto the page. And so if you don't care about having like server data, then you don't need a loader. And if you don't care about handling mutations, you don't need an action. If all you care about is this, but then in the future, when you're like, oh, you know what? I actually want to have a newsletter sign up form on my website. Well, okay, then add a form and add an action, and that's it. And you can continue on with your life and still have an excellent user experience for when people are loading your app and whatever. The most complex part of all of this, and the reason why I was so gung-ho about client-side rendering with Create React App or Webpack custom stuff or Gatsby was because it was really complicated to manage servers back years ago. But now it's really not. Like you can deploy Remix very easily to Vercel and Netlify and Cloudflare workers, and Cloudflare pages actually is recently added, and all of these different things where you don't need to worry about managing servers. It's just as easy to do server rendering with Remix as it is to do like CDN stuff, because like you connect your Netlify thing to GitHub and now you just push a commit, and like, who cares that it's running on the server? I'm not even thinking about managing those servers. So, so yeah, anyway, that like, I think it scales down really well. And what's really frustrating to me as a user of static site generation was that it put me in this little box, and I said, I fit in this box. It's perfect. And it's simple, except it never was. My goodness, it was always really complicated, but like conceptually, it's kind of simple. I can just build these things and put them on a CDN and I fit in the box. But as soon as I wanted to do anything outside of that box, like for me, it was, I need to determine on the workshops page if I have any workshops scheduled. So I can show a little banner, say, hey, I've got a workshop scheduled. And I would also put that at the bottom of all my blog posts. That was outside of the box. And what that required is now I have to do some client side, go get that data, because you can't server generate that unless you want to like basically rebuild anytime somebody buys a ticket, which of course I didn't want to do because it took me 20 minutes to rebuild. And even with incremental static regeneration, that you do have to build it at some point. Like, and if you change anything that impacts all of the pages, you're rebuilding them all. So like the thing in the footer or anything like that, you have to rebuild all the pages again. So it's like, how much is that really helping? It's and also it's immensely complex. So I'm not at all interested in that sort of approach to solving this problem. I'd rather take a different branch of the problem tree and not have that problem at all. It's just eliminated. So anyway, because SSG puts you in this box, as soon as you decide, oh, I want to do something else, it gives your users a worse experience. Whereas if you go with Remix, which scales down really nicely, then you can start inside of a small box, but you're not actually in a box. You're in the entire world. The world is your oyster. And as soon as you decide you want to do a little bit more than you were doing before, you can scale up. And so anyway, that's why I say, like, I can't think of a situation where Remix wouldn't make things better.
Another question that somebody had, Nicholas asked, how do applications that are not very route nested work? A dashboard, for example. I mean, you had a dashboard example, but I've definitely been in applications that didn't, maybe were architected a few years ago or more, and they weren't very route nested or didn't have sub routes. They weren't thought about that way. Do you have any ideas about how to reconcile that challenge?
Yeah, totally. Also, hi, Nicholas. Good to meet you. Nicholas maintains the Cypress or has helped with the Cypress testing library, and it's just been awesome. I haven't actually maintained testing library packages in quite some time. So people like Nicholas really appreciate. So yeah, those situations where it's like literally just this one page, there's no routing going on here. You do actually have routing. It's in the URL, and it's this query string that says like what filters they have on and all this stuff. And you have access to that query string inside of your loader. You've got this request, and you can like whatever data is in there. So it will still help in those situations. You say, okay, what is in the query string? Now I know what data to send. And as they make changes to the query string, we'll call this loader again, and you can send the new data. And so like we'll manage all of that data stuff for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And that query string can also impact the forward and backward button if you want it to. You can do like replace true and whatever if you don't want it to. But I think in some situations you would want that like forward and back button to change what filter is on and whatever. And so yeah, Remix can definitely help you in those sorts of situations. It's like kind of a sub route sort of idea. The query string will not impact like the parent route, child route sort of thing. That's only in the actual routes. But yeah, your loader can definitely react differently based on what filters you have active and stuff like that. So I still think that Remix can help a lot with that. And yeah, and then of course, like sometimes you have different widgets that like people can customize what's on the page and stuff like, okay, this user wants this widget and this bubble sort, whatever magic thing. And so in that case, we also help with that. We help with your authentication, so you know exactly what user is on there and whatever. And so you can determine which things to display, not only the data, but also in your component here, you can say, oh, well, this user has this widget enabled, so I'll go import that. And now we have that on the page, whatever. There was something else I was going to say about that too. Oh, right. So those components also can be responsible for their own data if you want, using the use fetcher hook that we offer. And yeah, and then that like hooks into our mutations API and everything too. So yeah, Remix can help in those situations as well.
Cool. Somebody else asked, this gets a bit functional. To what extent does Remix statically analyze versus evaluate the code? Asking to assess whether the exported functions can be replaced with composed functions like pipe, compose, flow.
Yeah. So like you want to be able to say export const loader equals pipe, blah, 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 like all these basically higher order function sort of stuff. Yeah, so Remix will not allow you to do that because each module cannot do, or route modules cannot do side effects. This is a really good thing. I don't think that side effects are great. And while you are just composing functions, so it's not really side effects, Remix's compiler isn't smart enough to know whether you're doing side effects or not. And I don't expect that it ever will be, because I don't personally like that approach to building software anyway. I've been doing this for a while, and I've never run into code like that was easy for me to understand, even if I was the one who wrote it. So yeah, I know that maybe like I'm going to be burned at the stake for saying so, but I just don't think that's a great way to write software. And so what you do instead with Remix is, even though it's not abstractable in that way, it's actually very abstractable, because one thing that we don't mention on here is, just like we have these error boundaries down here, where you can say, hey, there was a problem here, unexpected error happened. We also have those expected errors, like this user's requesting this invoice and they don't have access. We got a 401 on this thing, or a 403, or a 404. Like it was listed here, but somebody deleted it before I had a chance to click it, or something like that. Or yeah, there's something wrong with the data, whatever. So like there are those things that we can anticipate will go wrong. And so in those situations, like one of the big reasons why you want to take this, and it's like at the top and the bottom is where I'm going. One of the reasons why you want to be able to pipe things is because you have these common things that you're doing on every page that's like, oh man, like I have to, you remove the trailing slash from the URL, and I've got to, well, lots of hosts will do that for you automatically. But like I've got to check that the user's authenticated, and if they're not, I want to redirect them, and I've got to do like all these things over and over on every page. I wish I could just like pipe all this nonsense to that. Well, with Remix, all the loader is responsible for is it accepts some parameters like the request and params and stuff like that, and it returns a response, which the response is a web platform response. So go look at MDN for the docs on the response. That's what it is. And so because of that, it's not easy to abstract if you just think about that as the API, because if I wanted to say, check that the user's logged in, and if they're not, I want to redirect. Well, then I have to return a redirect. And then inside of here, I'd have to say if, or like const redirect user equals, determine whether they need to be redirected or whatever. And so then I say, if redirect user, then do the redirect. And that's not cool, because you got to do that everywhere. So the catch boundary basically says, instead of, or it adds a capability to both the loader and the action. And it is that we add a try catch around your loader and action. And if you throw a response, and then we'll, or like if you throw anything, if anything's thrown, we'll catch that. And if that error happens to actually be a response object, then we will use that response object. And so what that means is you can, in your abstraction, you can say, oh, the user's not logged in. I don't even care about the rest of the code that's going to run, because it won't work anyway. So I'm going to throw this redirect response. And now the rest of the code doesn't run. You don't need to check an if, else, or whatever. You literally, if I wanted to protect this route, I would just say on the line right above get projects, require a user, call that function, and that's all. So you don't need to worry about doing this piping stuff or anything, because you're not really buying yourself anything with that sort of approach. You can just say require user and require authorized, or require data, whatever it is that you do. And if you have stuff that you find, oh, I'm calling like these 3 functions over and over again, how do I reuse that code? Oh, well, you can make a function. Like that's how you do stuff in JavaScript. So you make a function that calls all 3 of those and say like, ensure that things are in a good state, whatever. So it actually doesn't end up buying you a lot to be able to do these pipes at the module level, because we have that catch boundary capability here. So anyway, look up catch boundaries. They're awesome.
Here's a neat one. Where does something like React query fit into Remix? And they postfix this with, is this even a relevant question?
Yeah, great.
I even wonder, like, I think a common curiosity people have is like, what tools am I already using that will play nicely or won't play nicely, or like are kind of like irrelevant now, or I still very much need?
Yeah, great question, Will. So and Salem. So the first of all, I'll say that most of the tools that you're already using will work just fine. If it's like a client-side thing, so provided that it can server render, it will work just fine. If it doesn't server render well, then we have ways for you to say, hey, this part of the tree doesn't server render. But I would encourage against using that, because if it doesn't server render, then what does the user see when they initially load the page? They're going to see a placeholder, which is not great. It would be better if you could just have something that's server rendered. Now, of course, you can't always do that. Like sometimes you're using Canvas to do something wild on the screen. And so like yeah, there are some use cases where you just literally can't do it on the server anyway. But in large part, like you want to try and server render stuff. So anyway, what the libraries that work well with Remix and specifically React Query. What we tell people is bring the libraries that you're using, feel free, like they will mostly work. And then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I can't wait until they discover that they don't need it. So like you'll start using it and you'll be like, wow, okay, so I've got my React Query and boom, I've got this stuff in there and there's the key and wait, I don't need this. Like there's nothing, I'm not putting anything in here. It's just like extra work. And so, yeah, you definitely don't need React Query with Remix at all. There's nothing that React Query does that you can't do just as easily with Remix, and in many cases better, because, and it's not because React Query is no good. React Query is great. Before Remix, I was preaching the React Query gospel to everybody. Like, this is amazing. But when you have Remix, Remix has something React Query doesn't have, and that's the router. And so Remix knows as soon as that request comes in, it knows all of the data requirements that are needed, whereas React Query needs to render first. And that actually makes a really significant impact when you are code splitting, because that means you have to load the code first, and then we get this waterfall effect. So if you're building a React Query app, unless you're doing some really crazy magic with your like preloading and stuff, some sort of weird compiler or something like that, then yeah, this is the experience that you're going to get with a React Query style app, or even React Suspense concurrent mode style app, currently designed as well, will have this exact same problem. And so you have to bend over backwards to try and preload this stuff when you don't have the router. But because Remix is a router, it already knows by the time you hit this the server to get this stuff, it already knows all the data that you're going to need, and so it can start sending that, or like in the case of the initial render, it server renders it all. So I guess I should actually also mention that React Query does server render. So if you are server rendering and you're using React Query, you do not necessarily have this sort of experience. You can server render this. React Suspense and concurrent mode also, the vision for it is to be able to server render. And so you can also avoid this sort of experience. But we did take the demo that the React team built and did a comparison between what their demo does with what you get with Remix today without the unreleased software, and it is significantly different, and yeah, quite a bit better. And like, this isn't a knock on React server components and stuff. Like, it could be amazing, and if it is, then we'll totally use it. But as it stands today, we can get a better user experience with React 17 and Remix. So anyway, I'm not going to go too far into that. You can read the blog post. It's awesome.
Cool. Good to know about that. Yeah, it sounds like there's a pretty good story for refactoring existing apps to take advantage of Remix. I haven't thought about this much, but do you have any insight or advice out of the gate for how someone might approach integrating Remix into existing applications?
Yeah, so this one's a little bit tricky because Remix is relatively new, and most people who have been building with Remix are building, playing around with it, building greenfield stuff. And so I don't know of anybody who has a very well established hundreds of thousands of lines of code app that they're migrating incrementally to Remix. But I have some ideas of ways that I would try to approach that. But in general, the biggest challenge that you're faced with when you're doing that sort of migration is Remix is the router. And so that's always, I've done so many migrations from one framework to another. And the router is always the most difficult piece is to migrate that router. And so with Remix, you can't really do the leaf nodes. That's what I would always do when I did a migration. It's let's start with those lower components first. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the easier thing to do. You can't really do that with Remix because so much of what Remix is the router. And the other piece, the other challenge that you have with Remix is the ability to, or the fact that you need a server for it to run. Because a big aspect of what Remix is and how it offers such a great user experience is the fact that it's actually running a server. And so for a lot of people, they're just like shipping stuff to a CDN. And so remix means not only like refactoring some of your code, but also like getting the infrastructure so that you can like deploy remix. Luckily, it's really easy to deploy remix to providers, but there are definitely companies that don't really care for that and they want to have their own infrastructure. Most of those companies already have some infrastructure, so you just talk to your DevOps people and they'll help you figure out how to do that. But those are the two biggest challenges. One thing that I would say, like if you have a very sizable app that you will have a hard time incrementally migrating or something, the idea that I have in my head is that you actually have two apps running at the same time. So you have like your Next.js app and your Remix app, and you just have like the server in front of it, like Nginx config or something like that. This is I don't do Nginx, but like this is what Michael Jackson has told me, like that should work. But you have something to route these requests and say, okay, so we're going to start with Remix and we're going to take our invoices page, and now that's a Remix app. And that's in control of Remix. And so you build that in Remix, and then you have your Nginx say, oh, are you going to invoices? Well, let's send you over there. And it will be a full page refresh. So that is not a great user experience. That's not our end all be all. But when you're migrating, you do suboptimal things until you can finish and give users a more optimal experience. So that's only really necessary for the really big apps. I'm really confident that we'll be able to find a really nice solution that's like an incremental migration strategy where you can deploy as you're going. But nobody's done that yet. And so I'm not sure the best way to do that, but we are talking with people about this and trying to find, like, we'll make guides for sure. Like there'll be a guide, how to migrate from Create React App, how to migrate from Next. And by the way, Create React App or anything that anybody that's using their own Webpack config or React router, period, that migration will actually be pretty simple, I expect, because the biggest thing will be upgrade to React Router version 6, and now you're using the router that Remix is using. And so once you're on React Router version 6, you just need to move files around so that it follows the Remix conventions, and then you install Remix and deploy it to a real server, and you should be good, provided that you can server render stuff. But again, like you can also say, hey, this part doesn't server render. So like there are there's a lot of flexibility, I guess is what I'm saying. So we're probably first going to have the Create React App and React Router with a custom Webpack config migration guide done first, and then we'll have the next migration guide out and figure out a really nice way to incrementally migrate it, so you don't have to do this weird Nginx thing. But if you do have like an enormous organization, that may end up being the best approach for you. And then another thing that we're looking into is micro front ends and what that means in a Remix context. I actually feel like it will be even easier and better for the user to use micro front ends with Remix than with other technologies. So we'll see. I don't have much experience with micro front ends myself, but we're talking with people who do. So anyway, that's where we're at today.
Very cool. Here's another one. Can you talk about how Remix handles CSS, or if there's any like consideration for that? Do you just keep doing what you're already doing? How does it work with emotion? Or I can guess how it works with style sheets, plain old style sheets, but
yeah.
Is there any consideration there?
So the biggest thing that we are just obsessed with is this network tab. We really want this network tab to look amazing for our users, because the way that your network tab looks tells a really good story of what your loading experience looks like, right? So if you've got this sort of network tab right here, then we know exactly, we don't even need to look at I was going to cover it up with my hand, but you can't see what I'm covering. But we don't even need to see the UI to know what kind of experience it is when you see a network tab like this, right? So we're thinking a lot about the network tab. So while yes, you can use emotion and styled components with Remix, and it's technically sort of possible to use CSS modules, and there may be a way to figure out how to get vanilla extract working with Remix and stuff. The user experience that leads to with today, like even without Remix, but today with the user experience that people have when they're using these tools is not the best. I guess I should say it could be way better, and for various reasons. And so those, yeah, there are things like it does work. Like we have documentation for using styled components, for example, and you do the same thing with emotion. We work with stitches. We're really big fans of Tailwind. I often tell people just skip to the end, just use Tailwind, because you'll end up with less CSS that's actually shipped to the browser, a more consistent UI, and it's just so much easier to use. You don't have to end up giving things names like wrapper and root wrapper and root container and like all these nonsensical names that we name things when we're styling stuff. So when you're using just class names with Tailwind, like you don't have to name it. You're just like, oh, well, I need this thing to be Flexbox, but in medium screens, I need it to be grid or something, whatever. And you don't need a name for that thing. And if you want a name for it, then you take that class name list and you give it turn it into a variable and you give it a name. And so now you have a name. So like you have both. And so we really, really like Tailwind. And that's what I personally push people to, is like skip to the end, just use Tailwind. It's phenomenal. It's really good for the user experience. But the other cool thing that I never even got a chance to show you is that Remix also works really well with vanilla CSS. And like all of the problems that led us to CSS and JS are not problems with Remix, not nearly to the degree. So the biggest reason why we all went with CSS and JS is because the cascade, like we'd have this giant ball of CSS that was included on every page, and anytime I changed this thing, it would break this other thing, and like, my goodness, I can't deal with that. There are so many permutations. My own personal experience, I was gonna pull it up, but it's anytime I try to pull it up, I have to log in and it's all this stupid stuff. But like on PayPal, if you go to paypal.com/transfer, that was the page I was responsible for, my team. And that page is experimented on like crazy. And so we had 12 permutations of that page, and we had so much CSS that was duplicated for each one, right? Because nobody wants to change anything, because like, what if I break something? And it's basically impossible to test every single one of them manually. And we didn't have like a bajillion visual regression tests for that. So we're just going to duplicate it all. And we ended up with over 90% unused CSS. No matter what I did, I would click open modals, do all the things, and still so much CSS we weren't shipping. And it was because we were afraid to change stuff. And that's when I moved us to Glamorous, which I created. It was the CSS and JS library. I actually first moved us to Aphrodite, and then I built Glamorous. And so like, that's what I was trying to target. But with Remix, if we look, let me just see our docs on styling here. This is how you do styling with Remix. You say here, this is within the route module. You say, here are the link tags I want on the page when this route module is active. And it's going to be some URL. Normally you'll import the file, and all that Remix does when you import a file is it just copies that file and puts it in the public directory for you. And it gives it a hash so you can cache it long term. That's all that it does. And so here you just say rel style sheet, and then href is the default import that you did for that CSS file. And that'll just be the URL to what we copied over. So what's really phenomenally awesome about this is that what I said at the first, this is what tells Remix what link tags to have on the page when this route is active. But it also means that when this route is not active, those link tags will not be on the page. And so I know that any style, anything that I change in this CSS file, all I have to do is I can make any garbage change that I want to. And then all I have to do is find the pages that are importing it, which would normally just be the one. And if it looks good, then I know I'm not impacting anything else. I don't even need to go to any other pages, because I know this CSS file will not apply when I'm on those other pages. And so that eliminates the problem of me thinking, oh, like I'm changing this thing, but it could change some other page somewhere else, who knows? And so that is phenomenal. So like, if you want to just go with regular old vanilla CSS, like you actually can, like it's possible. You can do that because Remix makes it pretty, like it eliminates the biggest problem that we had when we decided to go with CSS and JS. So anyway, there you go. use Tailwind. It's even better than vanilla.
Salem or Salim, you asked, you raised your hand. You've been asking some great questions. I just let you unmute.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm learning styled components so I can avoid that problem of naming collisions, right, and things like that. So I have all my
Mhm.
code for one component in that area, and I know if I change the styles for that component, then it's just going to change it for that component.
Yeah.
That's why I'm learning style components. So you're telling me that if I do styling and remix, that I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So since you're asking, I will expand a little bit more on this problem space. So yeah, so like all you have to do is look at what routes are importing this CSS file, and those are the only ones that'll be impacted by the changes that I'm making. Most of the time, that's going to be just the one route. When we're talking about component libraries, that's a little bit different because like if you have some styles you're applying to a button, then that's probably needs to be on every page, right? And so you'll put this links in the root route, which is active all the time. And so when that's the case, then you literally could potentially impact every single page. And now you're kind of back to where we were before when we decided, hey, let's use CSS and JS. But for those types of components, like reusable components, it's actually really normal and natural and like what you would automatically do to namespace them anyway. And so you'd say, if I'm making a button component, I'm going to have my button class. And so like all of your styles will be within that button class, like or if you, I don't know, put like a div in there, it'd be like dot button div, whatever. So everything's going to be namespaced. And so you won't have the same sort of problems. The reason that we had those problems before was we just had general styles that were like one-off styles, like here's my container. And now I have to come up with a convention because we have containers all over the app on every page. And so now it's going to be my X page container or whatever. And those naming conventions were super annoying and finicky and didn't work very well. And so then we went with CSS in JS. And so we don't have to worry about those collisions for those names. So yeah, you have for those one-off styles and those like page specific styles, you have this. For component library sort of things, like those reusable components everywhere, it will still be like a global thing, but they're naturally namespaced anyway, and so you don't really have the same sort of problem. And then, of course, again, if you just use Tailwind, then you will further not have this problem anyway because you're not writing vanilla or your vanilla CSS anyway. Taking a couple steps back, remember that all of this we're doing because it's a better user experience to not use CSS and JS. It's better for the user. Now, I should say that like there are things you can do. Like some people are doing some pretty interesting things. For example, actually, Tanner Lindsley, who wrote React Query and a bunch of other really awesome things, he rewrote his site in Remix. And what he is doing, he really likes Twinned, which is this special Tailwind type of thing that like uses a compiler and stuff, requires like a Babel plugin. We don't use Babel, so you can't use the Babel plugin. So what he did though, is he has this special resource route that this is, okay, I didn't get a chance to talk about resource routes, but they're amazing. It's basically a route module that doesn't export a React component is a resource route. And so what he's doing is he has a resource route that serves the CSS for him. And so he kind of gets a CSS and JS-like experience without screwing up the network tab at all. And so there's some interesting innovations, but we always have to remember that the number one thing is let's make sure that network tab looks amazing and not mess up the user experience by including like a crazy amount of CSS in the head, which really ruins that initial load. Like the user's just staring at a white screen while the browser's parsing all of that CSS in the head that cannot be cached. He made it so you can cache this, so it loads really fast and it's awesome. I'm pretty sure his site is open source. probably, so you could find it somewhere, or you could just like tweet at him and he'll explain how it works. It's pretty cool, and I've used Twinned before, and it's pretty awesome. So that would be another thing to look into if you're really into the CSS and JS sort of vibe. So. But yeah, just remember, like, user experience is the top. Like, that's start there, and then how can I make the developer experience even better, provided that I keep this awesome user experience.
I definitely like that. Andrew had a question pivoting to data stores and how we handle things like that. Would you still, for example, store the would you still store, for example, the user object in a global context provider, or is there a better way with Remix? Potentially, you might need it in a lot of components. Like, what's the right way to think about data stores, and does that change at all, or is there a preferred way of thinking about it?
Yeah, there is a better way to do this with Remix. It's way easier than you think. Let me think where I put it. So this is my app, and my Remix site, and I have this handy little util right here called use match loader data. And this is, well, there are kind of two ways to do this. First, there is in React Router version 6, the latest version, we added a context prop to the outlet. So the outlet is the thing that the parent renders that says, this is where my children should be. And then you can add a context prop to that that says, here are some values that I want my children to have access to. So then the children can use this use outlet context hook that will just give them access to that. So you can do it that way. The problem with this approach for doing that, for sharing like server data that you want everywhere, is you could put that at your root, but then let's say you have like some sub-component that needs to provide its own context value for its children. And so now it's saying, well, here are the workshops. And now the children of that one are saying, hey, I need the workshops, but actually I also need the user. So shoot, I've like overridden the context that was above me. So now the one above me needs to add the user to it or whatever. So it's like a bunch of extra work. So the outlet context, and the only reason I mention it is because it feels like the natural thing to do, but it's not as good as what I'm going to show you. The outlet context thing is mostly for like UI state, stuff that's not persisted in the server, stuff you don't get from the server. That's what that's for. So use matches is an API in Remix that allows you to get from any component on the page, you can get information of every route that's active on the page right now. And so now I have like access to, every route that's on the page. So that includes like all the way in a child or in some component over here, I can get access to anything that my root route has access to. And so my use match loader data accepts a handle ID. So there's a couple of concepts in here that we're going to kind of skip over because we don't have time to go in so deep into it. But just know that I have a mechanism for identifying a particular route module. And so once I get that route module, that particular match, then I can say, I can get the match data. So the root data. So in most apps, you're going to be loading the user in the root because like, I don't know many apps that you don't do that, but like if you didn't, then it would also be easy to manage it that way. Anyway, so we're going to say anywhere in the app, I can get that user using this use match loader data. And it's actually common enough that I think I actually, I don't remember if it was in here or somewhere else, but you can compose this together and say use user, and it would just basically use this to go get the user. So the answer is the user or all of your loader data is already in context. So you don't have to put it there. You can access it using use matches. And so, no, you don't need to implement your own context for anything that comes from the server. And because React Router supports the context prop with that outlet, you also don't need to use context for any of your UI state either. So like your days of using context manually are basically, in most cases, they're over. And I mean, like for application state, like you can still have like compound components and have state that's managed within that, like that totally context, use that. That's great. That's really what it's for. But so there's still that use case, but like for managing any kind of global state sort of thing, you don't really need it. And then that the next natural question is, okay, well, what about Redux? Heck no, you can bring it. It works. It totally, like, feel free, bring it along. And then when you're done moving everything into loaders and stuff, you'll have like one, maybe two things that are left in your Redux store. And you'll be like, what the heck am I doing with my life? Why do I have Redux in here? Like, I've got like 6 dispatches and whatever. And what do I need this for? So like, feel free to bring it along. It'll work, but you'll find out very quickly you don't need it. So yeah, Remix. And I noticed there's another question in here from Salem asking, like, do I need any other library if I'm using Remix? You do. Like, Reach UI is an example of a library that you would use in Remix for like a tabs UI and a dropdown and those sorts of things, like a modal. But as far as like managing state, at this point for me, the question of state management in Remix doesn't really exist. I don't think about it. Like, there's state management in Remix. Like, what are you talking about? It doesn't really make sense. So we don't have the sorts of problems that you typically have when you're building apps when you're using Remix.
Yeah, such a crazy statement you just made. Like, I'm used to thinking of state management as the hardest problem in front end, and to hear you say like we don't really think about it, like it kind of falls into the background when you're actually writing code.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very promising.
It is great. I'm telling you, like, so I work for Remix. I'm employed by Remix. The more people who use Remix, the happier I am, like financially and everything. All those disclaimers aside, I felt this way before I started working here. I was blown away. Like, anybody who follows me on Twitter in the last year knows that I've been tweeting about this nonstop, trying to tell everybody, guys and gals, this thing is like, will blow your minds. It's so amazing. I've been building React and Angular apps for years, and it's never been so awesome. No, seriously. So I don't know how to break through that disclaimer thing. Like, now that I work at Remix, like, my opinion doesn't matter anymore. But I'm telling you, folks, this thing is the next big thing. It's so awesome to build with this thing. I love it. And that's why I quit my thing. Like, I was doing fine and I quit because I love Remix that much. I just wanted to teach you all how to use it. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. But it's pretty great. And now, like, I should also say, like, Remix is not without its warts. It's still kind of a relatively new thing. Like, there are things that you'd be like, well, I really like using styled component, or I really like using CSS modules, or I want to use vanilla extract. Like, we're not like really well suited for those sorts of things. But again, like, we're focused on the user experience. And so, like, that's why we don't really support those very well, because they're not good for the user experience. And so not to suggest that vanilla extract isn't good for the user experience. I think it actually can be quite good, but I'm just saying, like, it's not infallible. There are things that some people don't like about it, but like, I can't think of anything that can't be made better by using Remix. And yeah, but like, I make money when Remix is like awesome and or widely used and stuff. So don't believe me, I guess.
No, I think we'll have a hard time not believing you. You've always been very genuine. So I was like,
I try to be. I try.
If Ken joined Remix, it sounds like he just entered a cheat code where he gets to be excited and get paid to do something cool at the same time.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I noticed Salem just asked about Epic Remix. So I've got epicreact.dev for those of you who don't know. By the way, epicreact.dev is written with Gatsby. So watch this really closely. So we go boom, boom. That loading experience, that's because we don't know if you're logged in yet, because it's statically generated. Watch again, epicreact.dev. You get the home page, and then it's like, oh, you're logged in. Let me redirect you to learn. A client-side redirect. Not a good experience. So I'm not proud of this, but Remix wasn't a thing when I built Epic React. But so a lot of people ask me about, like, Epic Remix. Will Epic Remix be a thing? And I do own the domain, and it takes you to the blog post where I announced that I'm working for Remix now. And at the little bottom thing at the bottom, it says, I'm basically building Epic Remix for free now. Hooray. So like, this is a big and exciting thing for most people. Like, if you stop to think about it a second, it's like, oh, okay. So I'm sad that Epic React isn't going to get an update because Kent's busy with Remix. I'm sad that Epic Remix.dev is not like officially going to be like Epic React, but I should be happy because my job now is to or what you were really looking for out of me is, I really like it when Kent helps me build better websites and like, improve my knowledge here. And that is what I'm doing. That's still my job. And I'm going to give it to you for free. So confetti. So anyway, that's the story with Epic Remix. It's still going to be like, I don't know if I'll officially make an Epic React like thing for Remix. I may. It's very possible that I will. I'm just really busy with like docs and stuff. But in any case, my number one goal is helping you all figure out really great ways to build awesome user experiences. So that has not changed. The only thing that's changed is you don't have to pay me for it anymore. So.
Well, speaking of what it looks like, you mentioned the docs. Is it, should we be watching the docs? Is there like a really good, are there blog posts there? Is it the blog that we should be looking for, videos? What type of content are you focused on or going to be focused on?
Yeah. So the docs will be the biggest thing for me. I'm going to be adding a section here for examples. And I'm going to be building, like how Next has their with X directory, like all their examples of stuff. We're basically going to build that same sort of thing. So I'm actually formalizing how people will be able to add their own because like Next didn't do it by themselves, and that makes total sense. I don't know how to use like your CMS. And so, yeah, we're going to be focusing a lot on that. We may have some blog posts in here. The cool thing is that now I'm in the house with Remix. When it was React, I was not in the house. So I had like my own stuff. The React team, sometimes they disagreed with it and they got like mad at me for teaching stuff like suspense and stuff. And I was like, I'm very clear, like this is not released software, but I'm going to teach you how it works as it is today. But yeah, sometimes they didn't like that so much. But now I'm in the house, and not only that, but I'm in charge of this. Like this is my thing. And so, yeah, it will all be on Remix Run. I will probably still write some blog posts on my own blog. Like when I'm like, oh, here's this idea that I had that doesn't really make sense on Remix. Yeah, so it'll mostly be the Remix docs. And we do have a newsletter that you can go sign up for it and like keep up with the latest. So that'd probably be the best thing, as well as Twitter. We're definitely pretty active on Twitter, and then we have a Discord as well. So here I'll link to that also. Discord.gg/remix. So feel free to go join the Discord. It's pretty active and growing rapidly. And yeah, I will probably take this jokes app, which is this like, basically I could make an epic remix out of this. Like there's so much stuff in here. Well, maybe not quite. Epic React is really big. So like maybe not just out of this, but like I could make a pretty big, like 2 or 3 workshops out of this thing. And so I will probably do something like that and do some like videos and stuff. And of course it'll all be free. So that is that.
I like it. I just glanced at the GitHub project and looks like there's 133 contributors. What would you say if somebody was curious about the code or contributing? What would you tell them? What's a good way to get started?
Yeah, well, first start the repo because I want to get to 10,000 before the end of the year. But yeah, I think the best thing that, well, so when we first launched Remix, somebody asked one last question before we stopped the live stream, and it was, how can we help? And the best thing that people can do to help is get really good at Remix. Just go learn Remix and build something amazing and get really good at Remix, because I expect that Remix is going to be enormous. It's going to be used by so many people, and those people are going to need help. And my team, like we're going to grow our team and everything's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. But the community, like no team could scale to the amount of needs that the community is going to have. And the same applies with every, like Next.js is in the same situation. We cannot survive without the community pitching in and helping answer questions. And so the best thing that you can do is to get really good at Remix. So like make buco bucks building Remix apps, and then use the knowledge that you gained when you did that to help other people learn Remix. Like at the end of the day, folks, Here's what I want. This is what I do. I try to help them, people make the world a better place through quality software. That's been my mission statement for many years. And the best way I can do that is by teaching people how to build remix apps. If I teach you how to build a remix app, you're going to be able to build a better user experience and build a better app. You'll be faster doing it and make your corner of the world better, wherever that is. And so in the process, as you're learning all of this stuff, you can reach people that I can't. And so like through your own blog posts and your contributions to docs and your contributions to the examples, you can help make the world better by helping other people build better websites through whatever you learn. And even if it's not remix stuff, you're going to be learning how to build great web experiences just for the web period. And so that's the biggest thing that you can do to help. Now, of course, like there are many issues and bugs and pull requests and stuff. We are super happy to for help on that. Discussions would actually be another good one. You'll notice that I am not watching the repo because I cannot do that. I manage my notifications through email for all of my other projects. So if I turn this on, it just wouldn't work. So we could really use some help going through discussions and helping answer people's questions, going through issues, and if somebody provides an issue but they didn't provide a reproduction, you can make a reproduction and help in that way. There's a lot of stuff that we could use help with, and most of it has to do with the rapidly growing community. So of course you're probably like, oh, I want to work on Remix Core, like you'll probably find some opportunities to do that as well. But it's easiest to find those opportunities by building remix apps. So go build a remix app. You'll run into something that doesn't work. You can open an issue and you can dig into your node modules, figure out what fixes the issue. And that's how I've done it. That's how I contributed. I contributed both to AngularJS and React, as well as like many other auxiliary packages, because I ran into those problems in the process of building a real app. So if you want to contribute to core, the best way to do that is by building something real and running into a problem. And if you have a hard time learning Remix, it's my fault, and you can get mad at me and then maybe contribute in a way to make it easier for the next person. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's a really good place to kind of close out the main event. Unless you have anything else to add or throw in there.
I just noticed Salem asked me how I'm doing, and I'm doing awesome. I'm actually really great. I just got my wife a couple Christmas presents and my kids some Christmas presents that they are going to just go nuts over. I'm so excited about. So
can you tell us?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So, well, okay, it's not as great as you might think, but it means a lot to them. So like my youngest son, I got him a scooter because the one that the older kids had that he's kind of inherited is like totally busted and it like doesn't work. So he's going to go nuts over that. He's 4. And then my wife, what she asked for was we had this front room, and years ago I got her a baby grand piano, and because like we love music in this house and it's awesome. But our front room is too small for that grand piano. So basically all that fits in there is the piano. And so she asked me to replace that piano. So I've actually already done that. And I said like, Merry Christmas, here you go. And so like we have a smaller piano. It's just an upright and got rid of the old one. And like that kind of hurt a little bit because I really liked the baby grand, but yeah, she just wanted more room so she could put like couches in there and stuff. So, but one thing that she's asked me for a long time is the ability to play DVDs, because like we're streaming everything, like who cares about DVDs, but she wants that because she wants the kids to be able to play their own media, and like heck no, we're giving them access to streaming, like nope. And so I'm giving her I hope she can't hear me, I'm giving her a DVD player, which and a Blu-ray player, which seems like such a small thing, but I think she's going to be really excited. And I'm getting a bunch of DVDs and stuff that so then the kids can open it up, they could do it all themselves. And I mean, we don't watch a ton of movies, but I think that will be empowering for them to be able to like, I get to choose, and I get to have that experience. So I think she'll be excited about it. And anyway, I also just like love the Christmas season too. So yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, Salem.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm gonna stop the live stream. Bye everyone on YouTube. But I'll keep the Zoom going in case anyone wants to hang out.